The first thing I want to discuss is active listening. And this might be a bit basic for some, but I find that the more I learn about compressors, the more I come back to this idea that I have to be able to listen critically to elements of my mix, to focus on specific parts of my sounds and not the whole sound itself. So in the series of EQ, I talked about EQ as maybe being thought of as a brick wall, and all the individual bricks might be the individual frequencies. And we can back up and see the whole wall, or we can focus down on individual bricks to assess if there are problems. If we're using compression from the same perspective, then we also need to be able to recognize that there are certain time windows where sounds are happening, but there may be imbalances or imperfections in individual parts of that sound that we need to be able to focus in great detail and specificity to be able to make changes with our controls that result in effects that we find pleasing or we intend. So one thing that we learned very early in audio education, and I'm sure you can find lots of videos on this, Kyle's done some, in the basics of learning compression is that we're dealing with envelope control. Dynamic range control specifically relates to how loud something is in one moment compared to the next moment. But we also need to be able to describe the contour of those moments in a way that allows us to decompose them into parts that we can think about in isolation so that we can discuss them in a meaningful way. And this is where attack, decay, sustain, and release, or ADSR, is critically important in terms of your ability to listen to a sound and then divide it into its parts. Now, in EQ training, we oftentimes focus on hearing specific frequencies or octaves of frequencies to train our ears to identify what sounds might be problematic in a signal. Like, for example, 500 hertz might sound to you like a hose spraying against a car door. That sound contains most of its energy in that frequency range. If we're thinking about compression, though, we don't think in terms of frequency necessarily. We have to think of it in terms of time. So, for example, in a snare drum, since I've been invoking snare drums, the attack of the snare drum is what's going to happen first. That's the stick hitting the drum. Then we have the recoil of the drum head, and that's the decay. And then it's going to move into a period of continued oscillation, which we would consider the sustain, and then it's ultimately going to give up all that energy, and that's what we would consider the release. So if I'm using a compressor and I wanted to control the levels of individual parts of that sound, I need to be able to set the time controls of that compressor to just focus on either the attack, the decay, the sustain, or the release, or a combination of adjacent controls. Perhaps my compressor is controlling the attack and the decay, or maybe my compressor is controlling the sustain and the release. So you have to be able to listen to those individual components of a sound and come up with a value of time that those things are happening in order for you to intuitively use the controls in a way that makes sense. A lot of times we'll see the attack time as being a range of fast to slow. Other compressors give you an exact time window that say, oh no, you want 2 picoseconds? Great, we can do that. Do you want 3 milliseconds of attack time? Cool, we can do that specifically and with great accuracy. And this is one of the benefits of digital compressors is we can use digital controls to have very specific input ranges. But in order to point the compressor in the right direction, we have to tell it where to go look. And so we have to be able to hear these things.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that clip. If you want to view the full Mixing Essentials course, click the link that's on your screen now to learn more about becoming an Audio University member.